My name is Viviana Blackwell. I'm 27 years old, and last year I died. Well, technically, the doctors told my parents I wouldn't survive the night. Their response wasn't panic, it wasn't grief, it wasn't even denial. It was administrative. She's not our real daughter. We owe her nothing. And then they left me there, hooked to machines, trapped in silence, while my body fought a war I didn't agree to start. A week later, they arrived at my grandmother's house like mourners who'd practiced in a mirror. They brought my brother James. They brought entitlement. They brought the kind of confidence people wear when they've always gotten away with things. They expected an inheritance. They didn't expect an empty bed. They didn't expect a letter. And they definitely didn't expect what that letter would do to them. If you're watching this from somewhere, you felt abandoned too. Some hospital room, some childhood bedroom, some marriage, some family table. Then listen closely. Because I didn't just survive. I rewrote my ending. But to understand why that letter mattered, you have to understand how long they'd been leaving me, even while I was still standing right in front of them. I grew up in a picture-perfect suburb of Denver. White colonial house, red shutters, a lawn so manicured it looked like it had a publicist. From the outside, we were what people pointed at and called lucky. Father, mother, 2 children. My childhood photos tell a story of birthday parties with coordinated decorations, Christmas mornings with towers of presents, family vacations to Disneyland where my mother's smile never slipped, and my father's arm always rested in the right place for the camera. But photos are obedient. They show you what they're told to show. My first memory of feeling different wasn't a dramatic moment. It was small, ordinary, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't the one living inside it. I was 5 years old. My brother James, 2 years older, all elbows and loud laughter, was running through the living room like he owned the air itself. He knocked over a vase. It shattered. I was already on the floor picking up pieces when my mother rushed in. "What happened here?" she demanded, voice sharp, like she'd been waiting to use it. James froze, wide-eyed. I didn't even think. I just stepped in front of him. "I did it," I said automatically. Later, I overheard my mother on the phone, laughing softly like the whole thing was charming. "Viviana's always been so eager to please," she said. "Not like James. James has spirit." Spirit. That was the word they used when James screamed in Target, when he refused vegetables, when he talked back. Spirit was what made him special. When I did my homework without being asked, I was well behaved. When James did his homework once in a while, he was brilliant. The differences were subtle at first, like paper cuts you don't notice until you're bleeding. James got the bigger bedroom. James got to choose restaurants on family night. James's artwork covered the refrigerator, layered like a shrine. Mine was neatly filed away in a drawer, as if my achievements were something best kept out of sight. One afternoon, I came home with straight A's. Perfect, clean, undeniable. I stood in the kitchen, holding the report card like it was a peace offering. My father glanced at it, nodded, and went back to reading the paper. Later that same month, James dragged in a report card with a B- in math. My mother clapped like he'd cured a disease. When I asked, carefully, politely, the way you ask in a house where questions are punished, my father didn't even look guilty. "Your brother needs more encouragement," he said. "But You're naturally good at school," he cut in, like that was supposed to comfort me. Like it was my fault my excellence didn't impress them. I was 12 when I finally learned why. It was past midnight. I'd gotten up for a glass of water because I couldn't sleep. Because even then, my body understood something my brain hadn't named yet. My parents were arguing in the kitchen. Their voices carried up the stairs, sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "You've always favored James," my mother hissed. "It's like you're trying to make up for Viviana not being yours." "She's not yours either, Linda," my father shot back. We agreed when we took her that we'd never treat her differently. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. The arguing stopped. I ran back to my room, heart punching against my ribs, and pretended to be asleep when my mother opened my door and stared at me for a long, quiet moment. Adopted. That word explained everything, and somehow made everything worse. Why my hair was dark when everyone else's was blonde. Why my eyes were brown while theirs were blue. Why, no matter how hard I tried, I never felt fully claimed. The next morning at breakfast, I waited for them to tell me. To explain, to reassure me that I was loved just the same. They said nothing. So I did. "I heard you last night," I said, voice small but steady. "I know I'm adopted." My father's newspaper lowered slightly. My mother paused while pouring coffee. Then she smiled that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Viviana," she said. You must have been dreaming. And that was it. No confirmation, no denial that felt like truth, just gaslighting and breakfast as usual. I learned something that day that shaped my entire life. In our house, truth was less important than appearance. After that, I threw myself into being perfect. Not because I wanted to be, because perfection felt like the only language they respected. If I couldn't be loved for who I was, maybe I could be valued for what I achieved. I graduated valedictorian, full scholarship to Stanford, started my first tech company at 23. My parents attended my graduation, of course. They smiled for photos, accepted congratulations, like my success was their personal accessory. But there was always distance in their eyes, like they were looking at a project rather than a person. Only my grandmother, Nana, saw me. Really saw me. She lived in an old craftsman house in Boulder, filled with books and antiques, and the smell of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies. From 13 onward, I spent every summer with her, because after the adoption revelation, my parents suddenly found it very convenient to be busy. Nana would sit with me on the porch swing and ask questions no one else cared to ask. How are you really, Viviana? Not what did you accomplish, not did you behave, not did you make us look good. Just how are you? Once, when I was 15, she stared at me for a long time, her eyes softer than the world. You have your mother's eyes, she said. It was the only time anyone in that family acknowledged I came from someone else. Who was she? I asked, barely breathing. Nana patted my hand. Someone who loved you very much, she said, but couldn't keep you. Someday when you're older, I'll tell you everything. But someday kept getting postponed. And then, 3 years ago, Thanksgiving dinner finally detonated everything we'd pretended wasn't there. Nana was there, frailer than I remembered, but still sharp as ever. My company had just secured major funding for an AI-powered medical diagnostic tool, and the conversation turned to my success. I always knew Viviana would do something special, Nana said proudly. Yes, my mother replied, tone dismissive like she was swatting a fly. Well, she always was determined to prove herself. Prove myself. The words hit something raw in me. Prove myself, I echoed. My father sipped his wine, calm as a man who'd never had to question his place in the world. Most adopted children go through a phase of overachievement, he said. It's quite common, actually. The casual confirmation of what they'd denied for 15 years stunned me into silence. Dad, James said, startled. What are you saying? Oh, she knows, my mother waved. She's known since she was 12. I don't see why we need to discuss it at dinner. You denied it my entire life, I said, voice shaking. You made me feel crazy for even suggesting it. We thought it was better that way, my father replied, as if explaining something to a difficult client. I needed truth, I said. The truth is, my mother snapped, we gave you everything. A beautiful home, the best education, every advantage. Most adopted children would be grateful. Nana's hand came down hard on the table. That's enough, Linda. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. Not after 20 years of conditional love. I stood up, napkin falling to the floor, and said the thing I'd been swallowing my entire life. You never wanted me. You wanted the idea of me. And then I left. I changed my phone number, moved apartments, cut the cord that had been strangling me slowly since childhood. Nana was the only one I stayed in touch with. And then, 6 months ago, Nana died peacefully in her sleep. I was traveling for work. I missed the funeral. My parents didn't bother to call. I found out through an attorney's letter informing me Nana had left me her house and the majority of her estate. I never got to hear the truth about my birth mother from Nana's lips. But fate had other plans for revealing family secrets. The day of the accident started like any other Wednesday. It was snowing, heavy, wet Colorado snow that makes everything look magical. Right before it turns roads into ice rinks. I was at my company headquarters in downtown Denver, running tests on a software update. Around 8 p.m., my business partner Caleb messaged me, "Head home, the update can wait." I stared at the screen, jaw tight. I've never been good at leaving things unfinished. By the time I finally left, it was after 10. The snow had turned into a full blizzard. I remember thinking I should call an Uber, but my apartment was only 20 minutes away. What could happen in 20 minutes? The last thing I remember clearly before everything broke was the way the streetlights looked through the blizzard. Not bright, not comforting. Just distorted, like the world was smearing into itself. Snow hammered my windshield in thick, wet sheets. My wipers fought like they were tired too, squeaking across the glass, clearing a narrow tunnel of visibility that disappeared again a second later. Denver at night in a storm can look cinematic from inside a warm car, the kind of view people post online with captions about cozy vibes. But nothing about that drive felt cozy. It felt like being inside someone else's bad decision. My Honda Civic crawled along the road, tires gripping ice that wasn't visible until it betrayed you. The heating system blew lukewarm air that smelled faintly like old coffee. My hands were tense on the wheel, knuckles pale, jaw tight. I kept telling myself the same sentence, over and over, like a superstition. 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes. The intersection of Colfax and Broadway has a blind spot locals learn to respect. It's the kind of place where you slow down even when the light is green, because you've heard enough stories. I slowed, but the driver who hit me didn't. Headlights exploded into my windshield, white and impossibly bright, so close it looked like the world was lunging. There wasn't time to brake. There wasn't time to think. Just impact. Metal screamed. Glass snapped. My body became weightless, then slammed back down as the car spun. I remember the sickening sensation of rotation, the way my stomach dropped, as if I'd been thrown off a building. I remember the sound of my own breath leaving me in one violent exhale. Then the second hit. Then a third. They told me later my car flipped twice before colliding with a streetlight. The airbags deployed. That saved my life. But it didn't save me from everything else. Pain came in shards. Not one clean ache. Multiple injuries arguing for attention. Something in my chest felt crushed. My collarbone screamed. My face felt wrong, like the bones weren't where they should be. And then there was the head impact. My temple slammed into the side window hard enough to erase the world. Not into peaceful darkness. Into a jagged, flickering nothing. I have flashes, nothing more. A paramedic's voice saying my name over and over like it was a rope, trying to pull me back. Viviana, Viviana, stay with me. Red lights pulsing across the ceiling of an ambulance. A cold mask over my face. The smell of antiseptic and wet wool and fear. And then, darkness. But it wasn't the kind of darkness you sleep through. It was the kind you float in. Time stopped behaving like time. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move my fingers. I couldn't even swallow. My body was gone. Yet somehow I could hear. At first, the voices were distant, muffled, as if they were underwater. Words drifted in and out like debris. Significant trauma. Temporal lobe. Intracranial pressure. Induced coma. Later, someone would explain it to me. The brain injury had left me conscious but unable to respond, locked inside myself, a prisoner in my own body. In that state, I learned something terrifying. You can be fully alive and still be treated like you're already dead. I heard a woman's voice, calm, professional. We've managed to control the intracranial pressure, but the next 24 hours will be critical. A pause. Have we located next of kin? Emergency contact in her phone is listed as mother. Another voice. We've called. They're on their way. On their way. The phrase should have been comforting. Instead, it made something cold coil in my stomach. Because I knew my parents. I knew how they showed up for photos, for milestones, for situations where other people might witness their absence. And I knew how they vanished when it was just me. Time dissolved again. I don't know if it was minutes or hours before I heard the sound of footsteps and a door opening. Then my father's voice, tense and controlled as always, like emotion was a mess he refused to clean. What happened? A doctor introduced herself. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I'm Dr. Rodriguez, the neurologist managing your daughter's case. My daughter. That phrase hit me so hard it almost made me believe it. Dr. Rodriguez explained the accident, the injuries, the induced coma, the uncertainty. My mother made a sound that wasn't grief. It was irritation. And what exactly are you doing for her? She demanded, like the doctor was a contractor she suspected of overcharging. We're monitoring intracranial pressure and maintaining the coma to give her brain time to heal. Dr. Rodriguez said evenly. She'll need surgery once she stabilizes to repair the orbital fracture. Surgery, my father repeated. What kind of costs are we looking at here? There was a pause. I could practically feel Dr. Rodriguez recalibrating her understanding of who she was dealing with. Your insurance information would be helpful, she said, and we'll need authorization for the procedure. Another pause, and then my mother's voice dropped, lower, colder. There's been a misunderstanding, she said. Viviana isn't actually our daughter. My world shattered. Even without my eyes open, I could feel it, like a glass wall inside me cracking clean down the middle. I'm sorry? Dr. Rodriguez sounded confused. She has you listed as her emergency contacts. She was adopted, my father said smoothly, as if he'd rehearsed this line for a courtroom instead of a hospital. Informally. The papers were never properly filed. A lie. I didn't need Nana's envelope to know that was a lie. I could hear the ease with which he said it. My mother leaned into it like she'd been waiting years for permission. You're not understanding, she said. She's not our responsibility. We owe her nothing. I tried to scream. I tried to force my fingers to twitch, to move, to give them any sign that I could hear them signing my death sentence like it was a cancellation notice. Nothing. I was trapped. Mrs. Hayes, Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice sharpening, your daughter is critically injured, without surgery. Then don't treat her, my father said simply. Isn't there a state fund for indigent patients or something? Mr. Hayes. She's not our daughter, my mother cut in, insisting on it like a mantra that could cleanse guilt. Not legally, not really. There was silence. Papers rustled. Then a new voice, maybe a nurse, spoke carefully. There's also the matter of Eleanor Hayes's estate, the person said. The patient was notified as the primary beneficiary. That word estate changed the air. I felt it immediately. My father's voice shifted, quick, defensive. That's a family matter, he said. My mother was not in her right mind when she made that will. We've been meaning to contest it. Dr. Rodriguez's tone cooled like metal. I see, she said. Well, in the absence of family willing to authorize treatment, we'll proceed under emergency provisions. Nurse Patterson, please document this conversation and contact hospital legal. A small mercy, not from my parents, from someone who still believed my life mattered. We'll be going now, my mother announced, brisk like she was leaving a dinner party early. Please don't contact us again regarding this patient. Footsteps, a door, then nothing but the steady mechanical rhythm of machines keeping me alive. They were gone. My own parents. Gone. I floated in darkness, my mind screaming against a body that refused to obey. A voice, quiet, stunned, spoke after they left. I've never seen anything like that, someone whispered. Their own daughter. Rich people, another voice muttered, disgusted. Call legal. Check her phone for other contacts. There must be someone who gives a damn about this woman. And that was when I learned my parents weren't just absent. They were willing to erase me completely, if it meant the world stayed convenient for them. Time passed in fragments. Pain came and went as medication dripped into my veins. Voices rotated. Doctors, nurses, staff. But one voice became familiar. Gentle, steady. I'm just changing your IV, Viviana, the voice said. You're doing great. That was Nurse Patterson. I didn't know her first name yet. I didn't know what she looked like. But I knew her tone, the way she spoke to me like I was still here. Like I was still a person. She talked during her shifts, filling the silence that otherwise would have swallowed me. Snow's still coming down, she told me one night. Denver's a mess, but you're safe in here. I won't let you be alone. Another day, I heard her arguing quietly with someone outside my room. I don't care what her family said, she snapped. She's a human being, and she can hear us. The research shows coma patients can hear, so I'm talking. She started playing music from her phone. Old rock, soft pop, even something I recognized. One song Caleb used to blast in the office whenever we shipped a successful update. The first time I heard it, something in me clenched. Caleb, my business partner, the person who actually showed up. 3 days after the accident, I heard a different kind of commotion in the room. Faster footsteps, voices tightened by urgency. Patterson's voice lifted slightly, relieved. She has someone here for her, she said, like she was announcing rain after a drought. Your friend's here, Viviana. You're not alone. A man's voice, tight with worry, edged with anger. Where are her parents? He demanded. They came, Patterson said, and I heard the bite in her restraint. They left. Silence. Then, I'll authorize whatever you need, the man said immediately. Surgery, treatments, all of it. Caleb. Even in darkness, I knew him by the way he spoke, direct, protective, like he was bracing himself against something ugly. And ugly was exactly what he was about to discover. Because my parents didn't just leave me to die. They started circling my grandmother's inheritance the moment they thought I couldn't stop them. And I was still trapped, alive, aware, and unable to warn anyone while they sharpened their knives. If abandonment has a sound, it's the echo that comes after a door closes. If survival has a sound, it's someone saying your name when they think you can't hear it. For me, survival sounded like Nurse Patterson humming softly while she adjusted my IV, like she was anchoring me to the world, one ordinary moment at a time. Morning, Viviana, she said one day, her voice warm, unhurried. You're still with us. That's my favorite kind of morning. I wanted to tell her I heard everything, that I knew what my parents had done, that her voice was the only thing standing between me and the kind of darkness that doesn't end. But all I could do was listen. Time in the coma didn't pass forward. It folded in on itself. Days felt like minutes. Minutes stretched into something endless. Pain came in waves, dull pressure behind my eyes, sharp stabs in my chest, a deep ache in my collarbone that flared whenever they moved me. Medication dulled the edges but never erased it completely. Still, I held on, because people were staying. Nurse Patterson talked constantly, not because she had to, but because she chose to. "I know they say you're not supposed to get attached," she murmured once while checking my vitals. "But that's nonsense. You don't leave people alone just because it's easier." She told me about her kids, about her husband who cooked terrible pasta but meant well, about the weather, hospital gossip, even the books she was reading on her breaks. She narrated my existence back to me when my body refused to participate. And then there was Caleb. I couldn't see him, but I felt the shift in the room when he arrived. Urgency, tension, something fierce and protective. "Has anyone explained what happened?" he asked Dr. Rodriguez. She didn't soften it for him. "Your friend was critically injured in a car accident," the doctor said. Her parents refused to authorize treatment and attempted to disclaim responsibility. Caleb didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was tight enough to cut glass. "They did what?" Dr. Rodriguez repeated it. Calm, precise, brutal. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "Then here's what's going to happen. You do whatever you need to do medically. I'll deal with the rest." He didn't posture. He didn't threaten. He just stepped in, quietly, decisively, into the space my parents had vacated. The surgery happened on the 5th day. I remember fragments. Being wheeled down a hallway, bright lights streaking overhead like comets, a sudden heaviness pulling me under. Then nothing. When consciousness brushed against me again, my head felt like it had been split open and sewn back together with fire. My throat burned. My body felt foreign, disconnected, like I'd been dropped into someone else's pain. But there was a voice, close now. "You did it," Patterson said softly. "Surgery went perfectly. Dr. Rodriguez says the swelling's already coming down." She squeezed my hand. "They're going to start bringing you out of the coma tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word felt impossible, unreal. Waking up wasn't a single moment. It was a process. Slow, brutal, disorienting. First, I learned to squeeze a hand when asked. Then to open my eyes against blinding light. Then came the breathing tube. I choked, panicked, tried to claw at it with hands that barely obeyed me. "It's okay," Patterson said firmly. "Breathe with me. You're safe." When it finally came out, my first word scraped out of my throat like it had been buried under rubble. "Where?" "Denver General," she said, smiling when she saw my eyes actually focus on her face. "You're okay, Viviana. You're going to be okay." But I wasn't. Not really. Because now I could remember everything. The accident, the voices, my parents' decision. Recovery was agony. Every movement sent shards of pain through my chest and shoulder. The first time they helped me sit up, the room spun violently, and I vomited until my ribs screamed. The first steps with the physical therapist left me drenched in sweat and tears, clinging to a walker like it was the only solid thing in a world that refused to hold still. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that when I lay there unable to speak, my parents had chosen convenience over my life. Caleb visited every day. He brought my laptop, handled company decisions, filtered press inquiries about my extended medical leave. "The doctors say you are recovering twice as fast as expected," he said one afternoon, sitting beside my bed. "You're terrifyingly stubborn." "Spite is a powerful motivator," I croaked. He laughed, then sobered. "There's more," he said quietly. I knew before he said it. I could feel it in the way the room tightened. "Your grandmother's attorney has been trying to reach you," Caleb continued. "Your parents are challenging the will." My heart thudded painfully. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you're mentally incompetent due to your injuries." He didn't have to say the rest. They'd walked out of my hospital room, left me to die, then gone straight to a lawyer. "They filed 3 days after your accident," Caleb said. "The timing isn't subtle." I stared at the ceiling, a cold clarity settling over me. Of course they did. They'd always treated me like an asset. Now they were just being honest about it. The next morning, Thomas Chen arrived, Nana's attorney. He was dignified, silver-haired, eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. He took one look at me, bruised, stitched, exhausted, and his expression softened. "Miss Blackwell," he said gently, "your grandmother would be very relieved to see you awake." "My parents are trying to steal her house," I said without preamble. He nodded once, like he'd expected no other opening line. "They've filed for an emergency conservatorship," he explained. "I've submitted medical reports confirming your competence. The judge has frozen the estate until you can appear in court." Then he placed a thick envelope on the tray table beside my bed. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this if anything happened to her before she could tell you herself. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. "What is it?" I asked. "The truth," he said. "I believe." I waited until that night to open it. The hospital had quieted. The machines hummed softly. Patterson had finished her rounds and squeezed my shoulder before leaving. Inside the envelope was a letter in Nana's elegant handwriting and several official documents. The letter changed everything. My birth mother's name was Caroline. She was Nana's niece, 18, scared, pregnant by a high school boyfriend who wanted nothing to do with a baby. The adoption stayed within the family because it seemed kind, clean, manageable, until my adoptive mother got pregnant with James just weeks after bringing me home. Suddenly, I wasn't a miracle. I was extra. Nana wrote about the way she watched my parents pull away from me over the years, how she confronted my father more than once, how some people, no matter how much they promise, can't love what doesn't come from their own blood. The adoption had been legal, fully completed. The documents proved it. My parents' claim that it was informal was a lie. Caroline had died 5 years earlier in a car accident. She never married, never had other children. I was all she left behind. I folded the letter with shaking hands. That night, I made 2 decisions. First, I would recover fully, no matter how much it hurt. Second, I would never again allow my parents to rewrite reality. I attacked physical therapy with a fury that startled everyone. "You're a machine," my therapist said during one brutal session. "Most patients don't push like this." "I have somewhere important to be," I said, forcing my legs to move. When Dr. Rodriguez finally cleared me for discharge, Patterson wheeled me toward the exit where Caleb waited with his car. She stopped before letting go of the chair. "What now?" she asked. I looked at the woman who had advocated for me when my own family wouldn't. "Now," I said, "I go home and write a letter." Caleb's guest room became my headquarters. Not because it was comfortable, though he'd insisted on fresh sheets and blackout curtains, but because it was quiet. Quiet enough for truth to surface without being interrupted by machines or pain meds or well-meaning strangers asking how I felt. How I felt was complicated. My body was still broken. 2 fractured ribs wrapped tight, a collarbone that protested every time I reached for water, bruises blooming and fading in shades of yellow and purple. My head throbbed in a low, constant way, like a storm that refused to fully pass. But my mind had never been clearer. I taped a large sheet of paper to the wall and started building a timeline. Accident, hospital, parents refuse treatment, parents file for conservatorship. I added dates, times, names, every line connected to the same conclusion. None of this was an accident. Not the abandonment, not the legal maneuvering, not the sudden interest in Nana's estate after years of indifference. "This is obsessive," Caleb said gently one evening, handing me a mug of tea. "You should be resting." "I am resting," I replied, without looking away from my laptop. "I'm resting in reality for the first time." He didn't argue. Instead, he sat with me, scrolling through documents, helping me organize files, quietly furious on my behalf. Thomas Chen confirmed what Nana's letter had already told me. "Your adoption was finalized properly," he said during a video call. "Your parents' claim of an informal arrangement is demonstrably false. They're attempting to exploit your temporary medical condition." Temporary. The word mattered. I wasn't broken forever. I wasn't erased. I was still here. Next came Nana's house. It stood empty in Boulder, waiting, full of memories and furniture that smelled like cinnamon and old books. My parents still had keys. They'd never returned them. Of course they hadn't. I hired a security company, changed the locks, installed cameras inside and out with remote access directly to my phone. Caleb raised an eyebrow when he saw the invoice. "Overkill?" "Insurance," I said. "They don't respect boundaries. They respect obstacles." Then came the hardest part, the letter. I must have written it 20 times. One version was pure rage, every slight cataloged, every betrayal sharpened into a blade. Another was cold and clinical, a list of facts stripped of emotion. Neither felt right. One night, after I crumpled yet another draft and threw it across the room, Caleb spoke carefully. "You're trying to make it hurt them," he said, "and I get why. But is that what you actually want?" I stared at the wall, at the timeline I'd built like a crime scene. "I want them to acknowledge what they did," I said. "Not just at the hospital, my whole life. And if they don't?" The question landed hard. I didn't answer right away. Because that was the real fear, wasn't it? That even with proof, even with truth, even with my survival, they might still refuse to see me. I started therapy the next week. Dr. Morris was calm, observant, the kind of person who let silence do the heavy lifting. "What do you want from them?" she asked during our 3rd session. The answer came faster than I expected. I want to stop needing them to change. She nodded, like that was the most honest thing I could have said. That's freedom, she replied. Not forgiveness, not revenge. Freedom. That night, I wrote the letter differently. Not to wound, not to beg, but to close a door that had been left half open my entire life. I wrote about the adoption lies, the years of subtle rejection, the Thanksgiving dinner where truth was used like a weapon, the hospital room where they chose paperwork over my pulse. I included copies of the adoption documents and transcripts from the hospital report. Proof. Not because I expected remorse, but because I refused to be rewritten. In the final paragraph, I wrote the sentence that made my hands shake. I no longer need your approval, your acknowledgement, or your love. I am whole without you. When Thomas called the next day, his voice was measured. Your parents have scheduled a visit to Eleanor's house, he said. They've filed paperwork with the probate court to collect personal items. Will James be with them? I asked. Yes, he confirmed. My chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to my brother since Thanksgiving 3 years ago. He'd been quieter than our parents, less cruel, but silence can still hurt. I closed my eyes. Then it's time, I said. That Saturday morning, Thomas placed my letter on Nana's dining room table, right where she used to lay out crossword puzzles and tea. The security company confirmed the cameras were live. Caleb and I settled onto the couch, my laptop open between us like a window into another life. At exactly 2:03 p.m., my parents' BMW pulled into Nana's driveway. My father checked his watch. My mother adjusted her coat and put on the smile she wore when she wanted to look generous. James lagged behind them. He looked hesitant. The locksmith came and went. The door finally opened. And just like that, they walked into the house they'd already decided belonged to them. I watched in silence as they moved through Nana's rooms. My mother commenting on furniture, my father opening drawers, James touching nothing, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Then my mother saw the letter. She picked it up, and everything began to unravel. My mother read the first page standing up. Her posture was perfect, spine straight, chin lifted, the way she stood at charity galas when donors were watching. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Her face held that same practiced neutrality she'd worn my entire childhood. Then the color drained from it. She sat down slowly, like her legs had forgotten what they were for. My father stepped closer, impatience already sharpening his features. What is it? He demanded, reaching for the pages. She didn't answer. She just handed them over. I leaned forward on the couch without realizing it, my ribs protesting, my breath shallow. Caleb noticed and shifted closer, steadying me with a hand on my back, but his eyes never left the screen. The camera in the dining room had audio. We heard everything. My father skimmed at first. I recognized that habit, how he'd always read things he didn't value like they were inconveniences. His jaw tightened when he reached the second page. Slower now, more careful. Then his expression changed. Not to guilt, to anger. This is absurd, he snapped. She's rewriting history. James stepped closer. What does it say? He asked. My mother finally spoke, her voice brittle. She says we abandoned her. Silence. James took the papers from my father, frowning as he read. The change in him was subtle at first, a crease between his brows, the way his shoulders stiffened. Then he reached the attachments. The adoption documents, the hospital transcript. I watched his hands start to shake. You told me she was exaggerating, James said quietly. You said she was always dramatic. She is, my mother insisted, her voice rising. This is manipulation. She's always been like this. Stop, James said. The word landed heavier than any shout. He scrolled on his phone, watching the hospital security footage linked in the letter. His face went gray. You left her there, he whispered. My father straightened. She wasn't legally. You left her to die, James said, louder now. You walked out of her hospital room. My mother opened her mouth. No, James snapped, finally breaking. Don't say anything else. I'd never heard him speak to them like that. Never. He held up the adoption papers. You adopted her, he said, legally. You raised her for 27 years. And then, when she needed you most, you decided she wasn't yours anymore? My father's eyes hardened. You don't understand adult realities, he said coldly. Medical liability, financial exposure. She's your daughter, James shouted. Or did that only matter when she was winning awards and making you look good? The room fractured. Everything I'd swallowed for decades spilled out through my brother's voice. James turned away from them, dragging a hand through his hair. I can't be here, he said hoarsely. I can't look at either of you right now. He gathered the letter and documents, clutching them like evidence from a crime scene. I need time, he added. And if you try to twist this, "If you lie to me about this, I'm done." Then he walked out. The front door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through Nana's house. My parents didn't follow. They stood there, stunned, not by what they'd done, but by the fact that someone had finally said it out loud. After a moment, my father exhaled sharply and pulled out his phone. "Call our attorney," he muttered. "Of course." My mother sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. "She's trying to destroy us," she said. "Not she almost died. Not we made a mistake. Just she's ruining us." They spent the next hour doing exactly what I expected. Calling lawyers. Making lists of character witnesses. Speculating about how to discredit me. Not once did they ask if I was alive. Not once did they express concern for my recovery. Not once did they say my name like it belonged to a person instead of a problem. When they finally left, taking a few small antiques despite everything, I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. Caleb didn't speak right away. Finally, he said quietly, "I wish I could say I'm surprised." "They didn't change," I replied. My voice was calm in a way that startled me. "They just ran out of cover." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "It's James, please, we need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the moment I'd imagined in pieces: rage, vindication, collapse. Instead, I felt steady. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., cafe on 16th Street, I typed back. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. The legal fallout was swift and anticlimactic. My parents attempted to file a claim for emotional distress, arguing that my letter and the hospital footage constituted harassment. The judge dismissed it with prejudice. Truth, apparently, is not defamation. A month later, they sold their house and moved to Arizona without saying goodbye, to me or to James. The silence they left behind felt lighter than their presence ever had. James and I started slowly. Coffee, short conversations, awkward pauses where we both acknowledged years we couldn't get back. "I should have seen it," he said once, eyes fixed on his cup. "I just didn't want to." "I know," I replied, and I meant it. My company thrived, pivoting toward medical technology, inspired by my hospital experience. Software designed to help doctors catch what humans miss when they're overwhelmed. A year after the accident, I hosted a dinner in Nana's house. My house now. Caleb came, grinning like he always did when things felt earned. Nurse Patterson arrived with her husband, both of them laughing. Thomas Chen brought an expensive bottle of champagne. James came last, hesitant, hopeful. I stood at the head of the table and raised my glass. "To family," I said, "not defined by blood, but by who stays, who shows up, who chooses you when it matters." "To family," they echoed. Later, when the house was quiet again, James joined me on the porch swing Nana and I used to share. "Room for one more?" he asked. I nodded, making space. Fireflies flickered in the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a car backfired, a sound that once would have frozen me. This time it didn't. The truth had nearly killed me, but it also finally set me free.